Hello, friends. Come in, come in. It's good to have your company again. And if this is your first evening here, I'm glad the road brought you this way. Wherever this finds you, miles from home with the headlights on, or in some quiet corner at the end of a long day, or already drifting somewhere soft, there's nothing to do now, and nowhere else to be. Let the breath go long, and the shoulders go loose, and we'll take our time. One small promise before we begin, the same one as always. There will never be an ad on this show. Not one, not ever. Nothing here will interrupt you, or startle you, or ask you to sit up. What keeps that promise alive is simply you. A quiet follow, a kind word passed along, a mention to one other tired soul who might like it here. Small things, keeping a small lamp lit. Tonight I want to start with the oldest songs any of us know. Not the oldest songs in the world, the oldest songs in us. Because for most people, the very first music they ever heard, before memory even properly starts, was a nursery rhyme. Somebody held them, a mother, a father, a grandmother with a knee that bounced, and sang some small nonsense thing that had been sung to them, in their turn, by somebody now long gone. Ring Around the Rosie, Rock-a-bye Baby, Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall, and in every picture book he is an egg, though no rhyme has ever once said so. These little songs are handed down mouth to mouth, lap to lap, and they go further back than anything else we own. They are, in a very real sense, the oldest unbroken thing that ordinary families still pass along. And at some point, for most of us, somebody spoiled them. Somebody leaned in, at a playground or a dinner table, or in a list on a glowing screen at 2 a.m, and delivered the famous whisper, the one about what that little rhyme is really about. The plague, they say, that the roses were a sickness and the posies were carried against it, that the game is 4 centuries of children, hand in hand, dancing a very old sorrow into something small enough to sing. And Mary, Mary, quite contrary, that garden, they say, is not a garden at all. There was a little chill in being told that, a secret passed along like a key. Most of us have carried it ever since, half believing, the sweetest things we remember, wrapped around something terrible. So here is the strange, wonderful fact at the center of tonight. And I will say it plainly, and then spend the whole evening earning it. The darkness is the newest part. The sinister meanings, the plague, the canon, the cruel queen, are not ancient secrets that scholars uncovered. They are recent inventions, and in almost every case we can name the person who invented them, and the year, and the book. Take the most famous one of all. The plague reading of Ring Around the Rosie, the one everybody knows, appears in print for the first time in 1961. Not 1661, 1961. The rhyme itself was first printed in English in 1881, more than 2 centuries after the Great Plague it supposedly remembers. And the first version of the rhyme that has any shadow in it at all is not medieval either. It is a newspaper parody from 1949, a joke about the atom bomb, a pocketful of uranium. Which means the darkness in our oldest nursery rhyme is younger than the atom bomb. The mushroom cloud got into the rhyme before the plague did. And when the 2 greatest scholars who ever studied these rhymes, a husband and wife named Peter and Iona Opie, and we will spend a good part of tonight in their company, When they had spent decades hearing that story repeated to them at every dinner and every lecture, they finally wrote down, with the driest sigh in all of scholarship, "We ourselves have had to listen so often to this interpretation, we are reluctant to go out of the house." So that is the journey tonight. Not a debunking, something warmer than that. We are going to follow the little songs themselves through a tiny red and black book from 1744 and a print shop and a goose-footed queen and the wrong grave in Boston and a ladybird on a wartime walk. And along the way, we are going to meet, one by one, with names and dates, the actual inventors of the darkness. And at the end, we will hold the loveliest question of all, which is not, what do the rhymes secretly mean? But, why did we all want them so badly to be hiding something terrible? So settle in, wherever this finds you. Let us go back to the smallest books ever made. The story of nursery rhymes in print begins with a book you could hide in your palm. London, 1744. In a shop near St. Paul's Churchyard, a bookseller named Mary Cooper published a little volume called Tommy Thumb's Pretty Songbook, and it was genuinely little. About 3 inches by 2, smaller than a playing card, sized for the hands that would hold it. Picture it new on the counter that spring. 38 little songs, one to a page, each with its own tiny etched picture, and the pages were printed half in black ink and half in red, alternating, so that as a child turned them, the book flickered. Black page, red page, black page, red, like something alive. The letters themselves had been stamped one by one into copper plates with punches, the way map makers and music engravers worked. Somebody had taken enormous, patient, expensive care over a book for people 3 years old. And on its pages, appearing in print for the very first time anywhere on earth, are songs you know by heart. London Bridge, and Hickory Dickory Dock, and Bar Bar Black Sheep, Oranges and Lemons, and Sing a Song of Sixpence, and one, Mistress Mary, quite contrary, standing there in 1744 with her silver bells and cockle shells, of whom more later. The compiler hid behind the loveliest pen name in publishing history, Nurse Lovechild. But the publisher was real. Mary Cooper was a working London businesswoman, one of the first 2 people in England to publish books for children at all, earlier even than the famous names that came after. The print tradition of the English nursery rhyme does not begin in a palace, or a plague year, or a code. It begins in a shop, with a tradeswoman, and red ink, because red ink delights the very young. There were 2 volumes. Volume 1 has vanished from the face of the earth. Not one copy survives anywhere. Volume 2 survives in exactly 2 copies, one in the British Library, and one that surfaced out of nowhere in 2001 and now lives at Princeton. 2 small survivors, out of all the thousands of small hands that loved the rest to pieces. And here is the first thing the record tells us, and it points exactly the wrong way for the dark legends. The rudest, most scandalous thing in that first nursery rhyme book, the one verse that later generations actually did censor, is not history holding its breath in code. It is a poop joke. Right there in 1744, a little verse about a robin redbreast sitting on a pole, which ends, and I am quoting the founding document of the English nursery rhyme, "Niddle noddle went his head, and poop went his hole." That is the great censored secret. Within a generation or two, the publishers had quietly tidied it, and wag went his tail, and by the 1830s, the robin had been rewritten into a perfectly innocent little chase. So notice the direction of travel, because it is the whole story in miniature. The rhymes did not begin as dark things that time scrubbed clean. They began rude and silly, and time scrubbed them gentler. The censorship ran the opposite way from the legend. What the ages actually reached in and removed was not a secret at all. It was a fart joke. A generation later came the book that gave the whole tribe its queen. Around the 1760s or 70s, the great children's publishing house founded by John Newbery brought out a small book called Mother Goose's Melody, and that is the book that fastened the name Mother Goose to nursery rhymes in English forever. And this book has a personality, because alongside its rhymes, the editor, some clever underpaid London hack having a wonderful time, added little scholarly footnotes, solemn ones, citing great philosophers, explaining the deep historical meaning of each verse. And they are jokes, every one of them. Under the very first printing of Rock-a-bye Baby, Hush-a-bye Baby on the treetop, the footnote reads, with a perfectly straight face, "This may serve as a warning to the proud and ambitious, who climb so high that they generally fall at last." A lullaby about a cradle in a tree, annotated as a moral lesson about ambition, as a bit. The editor was making fun of exactly the kind of person who finds hidden meanings in nursery rhymes. Sit with that a moment, because it rearranges the furniture. The very first Mother Goose book already contained a parody of the Dark Origins game. Before the United States existed, the hidden meaning industry was already so familiar that a children's publisher could tease it. The people of the 1760s were laughing at the theory before it was even invented in earnest. And the rhyme the joke sat under, Rock-a-bye Baby, is the same one the internet now solemnly tells us holds the memory of a cradle caught up in the fall of a king. Nobody has ever traced who first claimed that. What the actual record holds at the rhyme's actual birth is a wink. But if Mother Goose was crowned in London, where did she come from? Follow her name backward and you cross the channel. In 1697 in Paris, Charles Perrault published the most famous storybook in French history, the one containing Sleeping Beauty and Cinderella and Little Red Riding Hood. And on its frontispiece, there is an old woman in the firelight, spinning, with children gathered at her knee, and a placard on the wall behind her reading, Conte de ma mère l'oie, Tales of my Mother Goose. No rhymes in it at all, fairy tales, and Perrault did not invent her either. For at least half a century before him, a tale of Mother Goose was simply the French way of saying an old wives' tale. She appears in a Paris verse newsletter as early as 1650, already proverbial, already ancient. And behind even that, in genuinely old legend, stands something stranger, a figure the French called the Goosefoot Queen, a queen of the old stories said to have one foot shaped like a goose's, tangled up in half-remembered royal mothers from 1,000 years ago. Now notice what that old lore looks like, because the contrast matters. It is openly fabulous. A goose-footed queen announces herself as legend. Nobody ever mistook her for a footnote of history. That is what real old folklore does. it wears its strangeness on the outside. The idea that these songs were secret, coded, hidden history, that idea is not old at all. And we can watch its very first birth in, of all unlikely places, Boston, Massachusetts, on a winter morning in 1860. Here is how a legend gets a birth certificate. In January of 1860, a letter appeared in the Boston Evening Transcript, signed with a Latin pen name, written by a man named John Fleet Eliot, the great-great-grandson of an old Boston printer. And the letter announced a discovery, that Mother Goose had been a real woman. Not French, not legendary, a real Boston grandmother, one Elizabeth Goose, whose son-in-law, the printer Thomas Fleet, had supposedly grown so tired of her endless crooning to his children that in 1719 he printed her songs as a little book, Mother Goose's Melodies, price 2 coppers. It is a wonderful story. A real house on Pudding Lane, a real family, the old woman singing up the stairs and down again, the exasperated son-in-law setting her songs in type, half in revenge. Boston adored it. It got printed as the preface to the city's own editions of Mother Goose. It grew a dedication and a genealogy. To this day, tourists in the old granary burying ground are shown the Mother Goose grave and leave pennies. There is only one difficulty. The 1719 book does not exist. No one, in a century and a half of looking, has ever seen a copy. The one man who supposedly glimpsed a crumbling fragment of it in the 1850s died before anyone could ask him where. Search after search of the very library it was supposed to rest in found nothing at all. And the quiet arguments against it are lovely in their plainness. A young Benjamin Franklin was a printer's apprentice in that very Boston in 1719, and in a lifetime of writing never once mentions such a book. And Puritan Boston, as one scholar put it, fed its children on gospel, not goose songs. Even Boston's own Mother Goose publishers, a generation before the letter, had clearly never heard of the woman. They signed their edition with a different, invented name. And the grave the tourists visit? It is real, and it is the wrong woman. The printer's mother-in-law is not buried under that stone. A different goose entirely, gone 29 years before the phantom book was even supposed to exist. The pennies are left, faithfully, on the wrong grave, on the strength of one newspaper letter from 1860. I do not tell you this to be unkind to Boston, quite the opposite. Because this is the first fully documented case of the thing this whole episode is about. A warm, plausible, needed story about the secret origin of nursery rhymes, invented in broad daylight by a named man in a named newspaper. And it worked so well that a city has been happily visiting the wrong grave for a century and a half. Hold on to that. The machinery only gets more confident from here. Because in the 20th century, the game stopped winking. In 1924, a writer named Henry Bett published a book declaring that there could be no doubt at all that the nursery rhymes contained real, provable history. And then, in 1930, came the book that mattered, the fountainhead of nearly every dark reading you have ever been told. It was called The Real Personages of Mother Goose, by an American writer named Catherine Ells Thomas, and it announced, after what she called 25 years of research, the true identities behind the rhymes. Kings, queens, cardinals, downfalls, the whole hidden pageant. Humpty Dumpty, she revealed, was King Richard III, hunchbacked, horsed, irrevocably destroyed. Little of it had any source at all. At one point she quotes a line from Shakespeare's play, as though it were the historical record. And she told us herself, disarmingly, where her method came from. When she was a little girl, her mother, singing "Ride a Cock Horse," once remarked, and this is her own account, that the old woman on the white horse was Queen Elizabeth, delivering it, she wrote, with the certainty of one who repeats a well-known fact. There it is, the whole tradition in one sentence. A lovely thing said with certainty at a mother's knee, repeated for a lifetime, dressed at last in the costume of research. Not a lie, exactly, an heirloom wearing a scholar's gown. The folklorist's verdict on her book has been unanimous for nearly a century. Her reasoning was circular. She assumed the rhymes were history, and then found the history to fit. The great dictionary of the field gives her theories no credence at all. But her book outlived its verdict. The cruel queen readings, the royal identifications, this one is really about industry. Trace almost any of them upstream and you arrive, again and again, at 1930, at her desk. And then there is my favorite chapter in the whole affair, the time the joke came true. In February of 1956, one of the most distinguished legal scholars in the world, David Daub, Regius Professor of Civil Law at Oxford, published a short article solemnly proving that Humpty Dumpty was not an egg at all, but a great siege engine, a wheeled machine called a tortoise, destroyed at the siege of Gloucester in 1643. All the king's horses and all the king's men, he explained, clearly indicated cavalry and infantry. It was a spoof, a parody in a university magazine of exactly the kind of history hunting we have been describing. Daub later cheerfully described making it up. It can't be an egg. Humpty Dumpty is too heavy for an egg. I was sure of my case, simply from the sound. And a portion of his learned audience took it perfectly seriously. The theory escaped the joke. It mutated. The siege engine became a cannon, Gloucester became Colchester, and it spread so far that a children's opera was composed from it, and a civic plaque went up, and by the 1990s, an English tourist board was promoting the cannon as local history. It took until 2017, for the town of Colchester to install a public panel gently explaining that the beloved cannon story was not true. A professor's joke, walking the earth for 60 years. And what is Humpty Dumpty in the sober record? He is a riddle. A children's riddle, printed from the 1790s, whose answer, given right there on the old pages, is an egg. A thing that, once fallen, no number of horses or men could put together. In the earliest versions, there are no king's horses and no king's men at all, just 70 men and 70 more, and the riddle has cousins all over Europe. That is also, quietly, why every picture book draws him as an egg, though the rhyme never says so. He isn't a cannon wearing a disguise. He is a riddle whose answer everyone knows and nobody remembers being told. So let us do the honest accounting, rhyme by rhyme, gently. The rumour, and then the record. Ring Around the Rosie. The rumour says plague. The record says a ring game played across Europe, printed in English only in 1881, whose early versions end not in sorrow but in curtsies. One American version from the 1880s ends with the children stooping, and the last one down must tell whom she loves best. It was a kissing forfeit game. That reading arrived in 1961. Mary, Mary, quite contrary. The rumour says a queen's cruelties. The record says the rhyme's first trace on earth is that little red and black book of 1744, 186 years after the queen in question was gone, and, tellingly, no one has ever even managed to trace who first proposed the sinister reading. It is a rumour without an author, from the same school as the 1930 pageant. Rockabye Baby. The rumour says a doomed royal infant. The record says its first appearance carries that deadpan joke footnote about pride and ambition. The rhyme was born with a comedian standing next to it. And London Bridge. Here I owe you the honest wrinkle. The rumour is the old story about the bridge's foundations and what they were said to hold. And unlike the others, this one was proposed seriously by a serious Victorian scholar, Alice Bertha Gomme, who noticed that the game ends with a player caught and locked up, and that in the deep folklore of Europe there really are old tales in which a bridge asks a price, that stone will not stand over running water unless something dearly loved is given to it, and stays. The modern verdict is calm. No remains have ever been found in London Bridge. No document records any such thing there, and the earliest text of the song is a cheerful builder's inventory. Gravel and stone, iron and steel, dancing with a lady. But the game shape is genuinely suggestive, and the sternest scholars in the field treated the idea with a certain respect, and so the door stands ajar, quietly, in footnotes, for a century, without a gift shop. And that is worth pausing on, because now we have seen both kinds of mystery, and we can tell them apart. A real open question lives modestly. It waits in the scholarship, unresolved and unhurried. The invented kind arrives with a thrill, names a villain, fits too well, and gets a plaque. Which brings us to the two people who spent their whole lives telling the difference, and the ladybird that started it. It is 1944, in the English countryside, in the middle of the war. A young couple has left London to get away from the bombing. Peter Opie, 25, bookish, intense. Iona, 20, lately of the weather section of the Women's Air Force. They met, incidentally, in the most Opie way imaginable. Peter had written a preposterous teenage autobiography, and Iona read it, and wrote to ask the author what happened next, whether he had changed, and what he thought now. And Peter, being Peter, replied with a letter 45 pages long. They were married within the year. Now it is 1944, and Iona is expecting their first child, and the two of them are out walking a country lane, and a ladybird lands on a finger. And they do what everyone does, they say the rhyme. Ladybird, ladybird, fly away home. And then, standing in the lane, one of them asks the question that most of us never quite ask out loud. What is that rhyme, really? What does it mean? And where did it come from? And who on earth wrote it? They had known it all their lives, and knew nothing about it at all. Iona would later call what began that afternoon a treasure hunt which was to last 40 years. They had no university behind them, no grants, no posts, no degrees in the subject. Just a flat, a baby, and the conviction that somebody ought to find out. For 7 years they hunted every rhyme through old books and older archives. A young couple teaching themselves scholarship at the kitchen table. And in 1951 they published the result. The Oxford Dictionary of Nursery Rhymes. 550 rhymes, each one traced to its earliest appearance in the record, with every variant and every theory weighed. It sold out its first printing in a month, and it remains, 3/4 of a century later, the foundation of the entire field. And what did the record actually show, once somebody finally looked? That most nursery rhymes were never written for children at all. They are flotsam from the grown-up world. Scraps of old ballads and love songs, street cries, riddles, tavern verses, jokes from the popular stage, that washed into the nursery and were kept there, preserved by generations of children the way amber preserves a fly. The nursery did not encode history. The nursery remembered songs, because children are the best rememberers on earth. As for the hidden meanings, the Opies weighed the whole shelf of them, from the Boston Goose to the Royal Identifications, and set them down in one dry, immortal phrase. Much ingenuity, they wrote, and the bulk of it worthless. They spent the next 40 years proving there was something better than secrets in the rhymes. They wrote to the schools, and the schools answered. 20,000 children, in their own handwriting, spelling uncorrected, because the misspellings were evidence, sent them the rhymes and games and superstitions of the living playground. Everyone had told the Opies they were 50 years too late, that the wireless and the television had already swept child law away. The children's letters proved the opposite. The old rhymes were alive and mutating and being joined by new ones every term. Iona took a little tape recorder to the far corners of Britain and found singing games believed extinct thriving in city playgrounds. One London recording preserved a clapping chant that turned out to descend from an American doo-wop record of 1957. The tradition was not a ruin to be excavated, it was a river still moving. And for 13 years, every single week, Iona Opie simply stood in the playground of her village school at morning break, notebook in hand, and let the children explain their games to her. "I sort of moon about," she said of herself. "I have to get the children to explain. And they love explaining. They know more than I do. Playtime is the one time when children are the superiors." I think that may be the gentlest research method in the history of scholarship. 13 years of standing quietly in a playground, being taught. Peter died suddenly in 1982 at 63, in the middle of everything. And Iona, by her own account lost, running on habit, kept going to the playground every week through her grief, because, she said, the vitality of the children there was a comfort. And then, alone, she finished the family firm. She completed the books they had begun together and published them under both their names for 15 more years, so that the title pages still read Iona and Peter Opie, long after there was only Iona. The collection they had begun in 1944 with a single cheap chapbook had grown to some 20,000 children's books, the greatest such library in private hands, and when it went at last to Oxford, the public raised £500,000 to keep it together, and their working papers filled 247 boxes. When the last book was done, in her mid-70s, she wrote to a friend, "Oh, it is such a relief to have finished. No more books, hooray, hooray. I can settle down with my orchard full of ducks and geese and bantams." And of the whole half-century enterprise, she left one summing up that I want to read you exactly, because it is the quietest, heroic sentence I know. He wanted to be a success, and he was a success. We accomplished what we set out to do, yet our days were filled with failures. When successes came, they seemed to be only intermissions of failure. That is what the true history of nursery rhymes cost. 2 ordinary lifetimes, spent gladly, so that when somebody at a dinner party says, It's really about the plague. There exists, in 247 boxes, the patient, kindly, devastating file that says, no, it's really about children. So, the last question, and the best one. If the darkness was invented, why did we invent it? Why did so many of us hear the plague story and feel that little click of, yes, of course, and pass it on within the week? The scholars have an answer, and it is not unkind. A rhyme with a secret is an heirloom with a locked drawer. The rhymes are the oldest things we own, and the plainest, and a hidden meaning transforms them. Suddenly the small song your grandmother sang is a sealed letter from history, and you hold the key. And being the one who knows is a small, renewable pleasure that never wears out. Catherine Elwes Thomas learned it at her mother's knee, from a sentence spoken with the certainty of one who repeats a well-known fact. Most of us learned it the same way, and each age used the game for what it needed. The 1700s played it as open comedy, those joke footnotes. The 1800s played it as civic romance, Boston conjuring itself a founding grandmother out of one newspaper letter. And the 20th century played it straight, and perhaps that too deserves gentleness rather than a smirk. Because notice, one last time, the first dark version of Ring Around the Rosie in all the record. 1949. A pocketful of uranium. The century that first heard an ending in its oldest lullaby was the century with the most to set down, and it reached, the way people always reach, for the smallest vessel in the house. People did not find darkness in the nursery rhymes. They put it there, the way you put something heavy down at last, somewhere small and safe, where it could be held. The folklorists no longer even call the story an error exactly. They study it as folklore in its own right, a legend about a rhyme, the newest verse, so to speak, of a very old song. As one of them put it, in the single best sentence in the field, the story did not grow from compelling evidence. Evidence was gathered to support a compelling story. And so, at the end, two ways to hold it. Side by side, at equal weight, nothing to decide tonight. The first is the record's ending. The darkness was invented, and the invention has a paper trail. A Boston newspaper letter in 1860, the confident books of 1924 and 1930, a professor's joke in 1956, a popular history in 1961. Meanwhile, the documented truth was always sitting there, gentler and funnier than the rumor. A tiny book flickering red and black. A robin's rude punchline scrubbed politely away. A riddle whose answer is an egg. A kissing game ending in curtsies. A lullaby born with a joke pinned to its cradle. The rhymes were never locked boxes with secrets inside. They were toys, the toys of centuries, kept safe by the finest curators alive, children. And the second ending is this. The true story is more wondrous than the invented one, not less. Because strip away the plague and the cannon and the cruel queen, and what remains is the thing that was real all along. An unbroken human chain, lap to lap, 4 centuries long and longer, through Mary Cooper's shop and the phantom presses of Boston, and a wartime lane with a ladybird, and a village playground at morning break. Every link of it, a grown person holding a small person and singing. Nothing else we own has been handed down so far, by so many, so faithfully, and all of it in plain sight the entire time. No key required. The secret of the nursery rhymes, it turns out, is that there was never a secret. Only us, singing to our children the songs that were sung to us, all the way down. One of the surviving old Mother Goose books in a library in England can be dated because a child wrote in it. The inscription reads, "Harriet Beauclerk, the gift of her papa, February the 12th, 1815. That is why so few of these little books survive, and why each one is precious. They were loved to destruction by small hands. The whole scholarship of nursery rhymes rests, in the end, on the handwriting of little girls and the wear of small fingers. Somewhere tonight, someone is singing one of these to a child, probably getting the words a little wrong, which is how the river moves. The chain is still adding links quietly in lamplight right now. That is where I will leave it tonight. The little songs, older than memory and lighter than we were told, going on without any of us needing to do a thing. Thank you for spending this hour with me, among the smallest books and the oldest songs. Whether this kept you company on a dark road, or eased a long evening, or carried you the last soft distance down towards sleep, that is all it was ever for. Rest easy now wherever this finds you. The songs will keep. Until next time.